Hi everyone, this is Rich. Welcome back. We've been talking about a subject that is of utmost importance. To me it is, and it should be to anybody that's a believer, and that is discipleship. It's a subject that we don't hear much about today. There's another term that's used more frequently, and that's mentoring. But even at that, I find in Christian circles that this whole subject about mentoring or discipleship, however you want to say it, and I explained the difference in the previous lesson, what the differences are now. So, I want to move ahead with this and explain more and more what discipleship is, because it is the overall purpose of discipleship is so that an individual can grow quickly, spiritually, in a spiritual context, is what I'm trying to get across. Now today what I want to cover is what about how does priorities play into being a disciple. And last time I was talking, I ended with about the call of God. I'm going to pick up with that again and finish that out. And then we'll get into some of the benefits of being a disciple. So those are the three areas I want to touch upon. So I'm going to start with the call of God. When we get born again or saved, right after that, pretty soon after that, people begin to sense that they're being called by God, that they all of a sudden have a purpose. And there are scriptures that talk about this. I'm going to read one here in just a second. But we sense that God has called us with a purpose, and if we're not careful at this moment, it's a very crucial time, is we can misinterpret what is going on in our life and make wrong decisions. And so if a person gets connected to other people in this process of discipleship, that can save lots of problems down the road. So anyway, I want to begin by reading out of 1 Corinthians 7 verses 20 through 24, and this again has to do with the call of God. It says, "Yes, each of you should remain as you were when God called you. Are you a slave? Then don't let that worry you. But if you can get a chance to be free, take it. And remember, if you are a slave when the Lord called you, you are now free in the Lord. And if you were free when the Lord called you, you are now a slave of Christ. God paid a high price for you. So don't be enslaved by the world. Each of you, dear brothers and sisters, should remain as you were when God called you." That's in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 20 through 24. I want to read two other scriptures. And the second one here is in Ephesians 4, verse 4. It says, "For there is one body and one spirit, just as you've been called into one glorious hope for the future." So right away we can see the call of God on one's life has to do with a person's future. And in the process of working out this future, or let's say another way of destiny, hope is going to be deposited in your life during this process. Ephesians 1:18 is another one. It says, "I pray that your hearts be flooded with light so that you can understand the confident hope he has given to those he has called, his holy people who are his rich and glorious inheritance." So we can see from reading this that when, again, the call of God comes upon people's lives, especially near the beginning of their walk with God. And this is, like I said earlier, this is a very important time, and people need to just take their time right after they get saved and not make rash decisions. Matter of fact, there's a warning given in one of these, which was the first one I read. It says, "Remain as you were when God first called you." So the warning is, when you get saved, you don't make rash decisions. Don't go off and start doing things. Just take your time and wait, because what is happening? You just had a change of heart. You see everything differently. It's like your eyes been open for the first time. So just slow down, take your time, and allow God to work things out in your life. And hopefully during this time, God will bring somebody across your path who can help you with this. All right, so God has a plan for your life. So at this juncture, you just want to, again, not do things abruptly. Now, I've seen people right after they get saved, shortly thereafter, they may go talk to a pastor, they may talk to somebody else, but sometimes what happens, people can be misguided. They can be people that are just freshly saved. Many times they'll go around and ask people, I just feel like I need to do something. And sometimes they're given the instructions to go off to seminary. Now, I'm not saying that seminary is the wrong thing to do, but I do believe it's the wrong thing to do if Jesus hasn't told you to go do it. Seminary is not necessarily the answer for everybody that just gets saved, but I'm not saying you shouldn't do that necessarily. So that warning is given to just take your time. Now, so when this transfer happens from being an unbeliever to a believer, you must realize that you're no longer a puppet of this world. You now belong to Jesus, and you're part of his kingdom. And so it says in Scripture, he paid a very high price for you. So because of that, he wants to see the best for you. He wants you to reach your destiny. He wants to provide for you. And so and he has a marvelous future in mind for you, and he wants you to realize that. So we mustn't rush through this. Realize that God has a strategy for you. He wants to take you down the road that's going to lead you into the fulfillment of the purpose he has called you for. And it's like this. You get born again or saved, and it's like you've been given a puzzle with lots of pieces. You don't know where the pieces go in this puzzle. And so you just need to take a piece at a time and put them in place, and take your time until you can see the larger picture of what God is doing. And in this process, he wants to flood our hearts with his presence. So give God the opportunity to do this. What I mean by this is worship him, get into his presence. Get along with other Christians that are excited, that are zealous, that are on fire for God. Get in amongst them, and as they worship God, you get in there and worship with them. Because as you do this, they are bringing the presence down on the group. And as you become accustomed to the presence of God, you'll begin to develop a relationship with the Lord, and you may begin to hear his voice, either that moment or very shortly thereafter. And this needs to happen. We have to remember when we first get born again, we've left this world, so to speak, and we've entered into a realm we cannot see, which is a spiritual realm. We're not accustomed to that. We're used to seeing everything we respond to in life up to that point was what I see with my eyes, what I hear, what I smell, what I touch. And now all of a sudden we're in a world, we're still living in this world, but we're now around a world we cannot see. And we hear a different way, and now we're talking about, instead of the eyes of our own body, we're talking about, Paul talks about the eyes of your heart. He said, I pray that the eyes of your heart are open. So that's why we don't want to make quick decisions, because there's these adjustments taking place in you, so you can see what you're supposed to see, so you can hear the voice of God and move forward according to that. Now, if we don't, what happens many times with believers is every person I believe that gets saved or born again, very shortly thereafter, they begin to recognize that, my gosh, God's got a purpose in my life. Now, if they don't come across, and that doesn't if there's no clarity brought into that, and actually what can happen, they go talk to people, and sometimes they get misguided. They're told the wrong thing. And so they really don't discover their purpose in God. And as a result, what tends to happen then, their life tends to default into religion. And that's what we want to guard against. And discipleship will guard you against getting involved in religion, whereas you're supposed to be walking in a relationship with God. And so the discipleship helps that. So what does being a Christian look like? All right, I want to. It's very important that we understand to be a disciple, what is required of us. What does that look like? And I want to read out of verses Luke 14:26 to 27. It said a large crowd was following Jesus. He turned around and said to them, "If you want to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else. Your father, your mother, your wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. And if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple." I want to read now Luke 14, verse 33. "So you cannot be my disciple without giving up everything you own." Then I want to read another one, Matthew 10, 24 through 27. These are all describing what a disciple is to be like, what believers are to be like in this world. It says, "Students are not greater than their teacher, and slaves are not greater than their master. Students are to be like their teacher, and slaves are to be like their master. And since I, the master of the household, have been called the prince of demons, the members of my household will be called by even worse names. But don't be afraid of those who threaten you, for the time is coming when everything that is covered will be revealed, and all that is secret will be made known to all. What I tell you now and in darkness, shout abroad when daybreak comes. What I whisper in your ear, shout from the housetops for all to hear." Now, Jesus had lots of people following him. Now, everybody that was following him, they weren't all disciples. Some people were at various stages. Some people were going there following him because they liked the things, they saw the miracles. Some people were very interested in what he had to say. Some were coming and following because they had been healed. And then some were very serious about following him, and they wanted to know how they could be like him. So he had lots of people. So he turns around to the group. He says, "Look, if you want to be my disciples," he said, you got to hate everyone else. He said, "You got to hate everyone else." And then he starts listing off people that you normally would be very close to, your family, your father, your mother, your sisters, your brothers, your relatives. He said you got to hate them. Now, we can't misunderstand this. He's not saying have nothing to do with your natural family. He's not saying, talk bad about them or anything, or seclude yourself away from them. He's not saying that. What he's saying here is, look, if you're going to be my disciple, get your priorities right. He's saying, I've got to be number one, not anybody else. So Jesus was painting the picture very clear. He said, to be my disciple, you must walk with me. I must be the most important person in your life. And in that next verse it says, give up everything you own. Now he's not saying give away all your money necessarily, although we want to be willing to help those in need out. But he said, I don't believe that's what he's referring to. He says, there must not be anything in your life that's more important than Jesus. He said, you should follow Jesus. You mustn't have hobbies that are more important than Jesus. You mustn't have people that you care more about than you do for him. Because if you do, these things are going to be intruders into your life where you can't be a disciple. A person that is thinking about being a disciple, but yet their family members or your girlfriend, for example, or your wife or your children are more important than this relationship with Jesus, then guess what? You've just excluded yourself from being a disciple. A disciple is somebody who loves Jesus with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and they follow him no matter where he goes. Now, does that mean you don't have anything to do with your family? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means priorities. Keep Jesus number one, and then you'll have an overflow of love for your wife and your children and your father and your mother and so on. All right, so another thing is, too, in following Jesus, how can we tell if somebody really has a heart after Jesus? Well, many years ago, I pastored for many years, and I had the people I was looking after. And when you get around certain people and you start talking about spiritual things, some things really start to clear. There's been many, many occasions where I've been reading books, and Christian books, and as I'm reading these books, I get very excited about them. So one day I was reading this Christian book, and I don't remember the title of it anymore, but I just remember I was really excited about it. So I went up to one of the guys in my church. I started talking to him about spiritual things and about about what I was learning in this book. And as and I learned the book, I would also read scriptures, and I'm really excited. I'm sharing with him. And so I began to share with him some of the things I was learning, and the person responded back to me about sports. Now, I wasn't talking about sports, but you could, from that kind of response, you can tell the main thing in this person's life, one of the more important things in this person's life was sports. That we have to be careful that we don't place other things above following after Jesus. He's got, like I said, he's got to be number one. All right, so I just want to drive that home, because whatever we're influenced by the most, whatever we give our thinking to the most, that can be what we're serving. For example, if you're really bent on making money and you're good, let's say you're good at making money, you tend, and you're really excited about it, then you tend to talk about how to make money rather than Jesus himself. So what is ever on a person's heart, and then whatever's influencing their heart the most is what comes out of their mouth all the time. And so for a disciple, a true disciple, what should be flowing out of their mouth frequently is this relationship they have with Jesus. So if something else has taken the place of that, then you know something's not right. Now, let me just explain, let me tell you a story of what happened to me. This was many, many years ago. This was back in 1974. That was the year I got saved. And when I got saved, it was a radical transformation that took place in my life. I'd been seeking after something that was more important, something that made sense. And I was trying to figure out what is life about? Why am I here? And after about a year of doing that, it was presented to me the good news of the gospel for the first time. And I responded to it. And I went down and on the gym floor. It was in amongst about 1,000 people, and I gave my life to Jesus that night. My wife went with me. We both got saved that night. Now, what kind of response did that have on me? Well, it changed my life around. And so my thoughts quickly turned to my family members. I knew for the first time in my life I was going to heaven. And my concern now was, what about my family, my natural family? So I began to share the good news with all of my family, my parents, my aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters. And I would do it one at a time. And sometimes I'd do it with me talking to a group of 3 or 4 of them. But my driving motivation in this is, when we die, and this time I was only 24 years old, but I thought, when we die, I don't want my relatives to be in hell. And that's what was motivating me to talk to them. And the result of that was I got excommunicated. I was over at my father's house one night. I'd already talked to one of my brothers, and this was early on. And while I was in the house, my brother was there. He actually lived someplace else, but he was at home that night. He brought up the whole subject about water baptism in front of my father. And my father, so I began to talk about it. My father got really upset because he didn't agree with about water baptism and about being saved and all this. He'd never heard this stuff before. So as a result, my parents, my father, excommunicated me from the family. And so my wife and I went out to the car that night after being pushed away from the family. And I told her at the time, I said, at least everything's out in the open. They know where I stand. Now, they were waiting to see if I was going to come back to the way they were, if I was going to change. And there was no way that was going to happen. So anyway, over a course of time, eventually we started getting involved back in the family. My parents invited us back to family gatherings because we had been left out for a while. But that didn't change me. I hadn't changed at all. I wasn't becoming like them. I was really connected to Jesus, and I wanted my family to be like him. Now, since I was included back in the family again, I just continued to talk to my siblings, my aunts and uncles and so on. And it wasn't long after a few years, almost everybody in my family got saved. And to this day, most of them are Christians. And why do I say this? Because Jesus was number one in my life. He was number one. And that's what a disciple's all about. To be a disciple of Jesus, he's got to be number one. You can be a believer, but all believers, like I said earlier, are not disciples. So the key here is never place your family to be more important than Jesus. He's, like I said, he's got to be the one that you're really sold out on. And Jesus has got to be kept number one. So when it comes to families, You have your natural family, and then if you're in a church where the church is excited, people are all saved and they're growing and so on, you have your spiritual family. Now, I am never going to say that your spiritual, you should never forsake your natural family. Your natural family is a very important part of your life. And one of the most important things about your natural family, you should want them all to be saved and be excited and moving on with things of God. But there is the aspect of your spiritual family, and they are different. The spiritual family, the spirituality is much higher than the natural aspect. And so the spiritual family fulfills things in your own life that a natural family cannot do, unless your natural family is a spiritual family. If your natural family are people that are born again on fire for God, that's different. But that's not always the case. So to go to our natural family, if they're not all born again, you have a task there, and that is tell them about the Lord. All right, discipleship is showing. True discipleship is when somebody, because when we submit ourselves unto somebody, we're submitting ourselves unto the authority of another. And then we have to show proper respect for that person and honor that person. And that's where discipleship takes place. That's what Jesus was talking about. It says when he's talking about the student and the student and the teacher and the slave and the master. So we have to make sure when we are being discipled that we show the proper respect to the person that's discipling us. We honor them. We're ready to receive from them. We see ourselves, we must have a submissive attitude where I see myself under their authority. And that's very important for that to happen so you can receive things from them. Let me just explain something real quickly. When in the process of discipleship, when you have a person or a couple who are discipling you, there is a spiritual activity that takes place in this. When you go to this couple or this person and you are needing a solution to an answer, and you don't know exactly what to do, you've prayed about it, you've asked the Lord about it, but you're still not real sure what to do, then you go to this couple and you submit yourself unto this couple. You have a relationship with them. You tell them about your problem. Now, you've already prayed about it. You've asked the Lord about it. You've thought about it, and you still don't know what to do. This is what true discipleship is for. You go to this couple and you ask them, what actually happens there? Well, this other couple should be a couple that's more mature in the things of God than you. And God honors discipleship. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is, when you sit under a couple that are more mature than you and you're asking them for guidance, you're asking them for advice, they literally may not know the answer for you. But as you are telling them, something spiritual happens. God begins to reveal your solution to them. And they know this is not coming through their advice. See, we can give out advice from our own experience if we have it. But sometimes we don't, as those who are discipling others, sometimes we don't, possibly we haven't experienced this before. Or we may not know what the Word says about it. But in this process of discipleship, God, by His Spirit, will download things from heaven, the solutions for problems, into the one that's discipling the person, and that person then will tell them what to do. That's the process of discipleship that takes place. That's the spiritual aspect that takes place through discipleship. So then the person that was being discipled didn't know what to do. All of a sudden they got the answer. And they take it and they run with it. That is, in so many words, the process that takes place through discipleship. That's how people really get helped. Now, what are some of the benefits of discipleship? Well, one of them I've already mentioned to you. There's accelerated growth. I want to go into more detail on this. But remember, Jesus was with the disciples for 3.5 years approximately. All right, he had 12 that he had many more than 12 following him. But out of this group, we know there was at least 70, but there was multitudes that followed him. But out of the multitudes, he selected 12. And these 12, he called his disciples, but again, there were many others. But after 3.5 years, he referred to them as apostles. So in a 3.5 year period, these guys never went to seminary. They were taught, they were around Jesus. And the Pharisees and Sadducees of the day couldn't believe the authority and the things they knew when they met them after Pentecost. They referred to these guys as unlearned men, but yet they remembered they had been with Jesus. So discipleship accelerates the growth in people. Now, every believer should be wanting to grow in Christ. So my question is, how do you grow in Christ? All I'm saying is the fastest and most accelerated growth is discipleship. And you'll grow much quicker through that process. All right, so they spent 24/7 with Jesus. At 3.5 years, these guys were called apostles. And then they grew, and then when he released them on the day when he ascended, they experienced Pentecost. And when you read through the book of Acts, it makes this statement. And this is talking about, of course, Paul as well, and many, many other disciples that were brought alongside the 12 apostles and other apostles too. That that generation turned their world upside down in one generation. How was that possible? Through discipleship. I believe with all my heart this is why we are not turning our world upside down. Because this subject I'm talking about, discipleship, is not being practiced as it should be. And before Jesus comes back, this has got to come back on the scene so that Christians can experience accelerated growth and so we can start turning our world upside down as well. Thank you much. I'm gonna continue on this subject in the next time we get together. Thank you.